Hi, this is Sonya Hines with the Marzo Network. Welcome to another episode of Navigating Christian Womanhood. Our desire is to reach women where they are in every aspect of life with wisdom from God's Word and biblical counsel from our guests. I look forward to walking this journey with you. Hi, this is Sonya Hines, and welcome to another episode of Navigating Christian Womanhood. Today in the studio with me is Daun Whittaker, and Daun is the author of the book, Change Your Mind and Change Your Life, Your Guide to Emotional Health and Fulfillment. You know, when we picture health, generally we think of physical health. And with a rise in mental health diagnoses, we think of that as well. But there's another component to mental health, and that's emotional health. And that plays such a strong role in our well-being. So Daun is here today to talk about her book. I'm just going to turn it to the camera. Again, Change Your Mind and Change Your Life, Your Guide to Emotional Health and Fulfillment. Welcome, Daun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Daun, I'm going to read your bio here.
Okay.
Daun has been counseling in her private practice since 2009, and she has received a master's in social work from Syracuse University. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's also a certified psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner and holds a doctor of theology in Christian counseling from Summit Bible College in Bakersfield, California. You've done a lot, Daun.
I'm tired just hearing it.
But we're so grateful that you've done all of that because you really are an expert in this field talking about emotional health. And, you know, the overall premise, well, tell us, what is the overall premise of your book?
The overall premise is to provide practical guidance based on my experience and the people around me who have had experiences to let anyone be able to read it and have a possible solution to some issues that they have. And it's really something that simple. It's not psychoanalytical. It's not so clinical that only a small percentage of people can use it.
It's practical.
It is very practical.
You know, what I like about your book is that you have different principles that people can follow. So it's a very easy read. And if someone is struggling with the whole book is great, but if someone is struggling with a particular issue, they can go to one of those principles and read about them. So let me ask you, we're talking about emotional health, and, you know, we can have good days and we can have bad days. We can have stressful situations in our lives. We can have moments where sometimes we're feeling kind of blue. So, Daun, when it comes to emotional health, which is what your book focuses on, what does being emotionally healthy look like?
That is a very good question. And I think one of the things that we have to start with is understanding that we are created in God's image. And He has given us a variety of emotions. Men have actually less of a range of emotions because of our culture than women do. But it is really being able to use them the way that we are designed to and not let them be in the driver's seat, making all of our decisions so that we are powerless against our circumstances.
So we have good days, we have bad days, we have moments of stress. Sometimes we may feel like we have the blues, and those things happen to everyone. But when should we be concerned about those things?
I would say some of the biggest concern comes when we start ruminating, where worry doesn't result in, okay, I'm concerned, I need to make a plan. It is something we start ruminating on, and then we have dread for the future, which is anxiety, is dread for the future. I think when we get to that place, when depression is affecting the quality of our life and we're not able to get out of bed, when unforgiveness grabs such a hold that we are walking around with real bitter hearts, those kind of things.
Now, you have, as I mentioned, you have different principles in your book. Why don't you share some of those principles with us?
Well, I think the first principle, which is really needed to be understood to have some good background with everything else is be intentional. And how I always do it, and I actually sit there and create this meter, and I say, what is the outcome you want to achieve? And, Jesus was always intentional.
Yes.
He didn't do things without intention. And I'm not saying that we have to always be intentional and not spontaneous. It's not like that. But we need to be thoughtful about the words we speak and the thoughts we think. And right now, I could say or do something that could totally derail everything we're doing here. But the outcome I want is to really get this book in the hands of people who need it. So I have to be thoughtful, just as you are doing the show. And I think that's the first and primary principle. If we're not intentional, the rest is very hard to do. And so that's a big one.
Yeah, so it's like having just kind of a regular plan, and not just a plan, but again, like intentional about carrying out that plan. One verse that comes to mind, and you mentioned this in your book, is Proverbs 13, verse 16. It says, every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly.
Yes.
Right. And so every prudent man acts with knowledge. So intentionally considering, another thing you mentioned was intentionally considering the outcome, of that intentionality, I guess.
Well, and I think that in business, we're pretty good at that. We recognize the importance of that. In our families and in our relationships, I think our culture promotes that this all needs to happen naturally, right? You fall out of love with people after a time, if you're not meant to be together, that kind of thing. It takes away the idea of that we need to be intentional, that love is intentional, that everything in our life. So if you have a young child, for instance, and the book is filled with examples, like real people, real examples, all the names and circumstances changed. But if you are trying to direct this child to do something or behave in a certain way, you can't just get frustrated and yell. And I know we all do. I've done it before. It's not like this isn't a book of condemnation, but it's saying if you can think, what is the outcome that I want Johnny to do? And once you have that in your mind and you imagine it and that's clear, you're going to change how you're dealing with Johnny. And it really is that simple. And after some practice, it becomes the way that you view things. It becomes very easy to do.
Right. One thing you mentioned about was, love and relationships. And, sometimes we aren't as intentional with those things. We just kind of move about through that relationship, hoping that it will work out for the best. But, really good relationships, people work on those.
They do.
They're very intentional with that.
There is a lot of responsibility in every relationship that we have.
Yeah.
So
now give us another principle.
Well, one of my favorite, and it's probably because God spanked me with this one so much. The second one is time versus priority.
Oh.
And I read that or wrote that because I realized that I was blaming everything on I don't have enough time until I realized I could make some phone calls and not others. Yeah. And I realized I can be around some people and not others. And truly it is an issue of priority. We all have the same amount of time.
Right.
And, I counsel all day on Thursday, but this was a priority, so I moved my schedule around. There's always ways to do things. And so I really wrote about that because the problem with saying I don't have time, if you're telling somebody that, you're making them less valued. But the other thing is, when it's a matter of time, you have no responsibility. You could be like, I can't do anything about it. And then you let your circumstances control all of your outcomes. And that is not a place that you want to get to. I do a lot of work with the homeless and critically needy people. And when you're asking, we have good days and bad days and all of that, a lot of that is because we let all of our circumstances control everything. And so how we feel is based on our circumstances. Not like Paul being in prison, praising God, because he had an internal mechanism. He had the Holy Spirit. He had, God with him. So I think that's really a big difference. But we need to say the words. One of the principles is about words. We need to say the words. It's not a priority. And we need to not feel guilty about that, because we have to make these decisions. It's normal. It's healthy. It's happy. But when we make the decision, say, okay, it wasn't a priority to have lunch with Kate this week, then that's okay. Maybe we were really busy, but then it's our responsibility, and we need to hear ourselves really say that.
And I think that's hard. This was very convicting for me as well when I read that in the book, because I know situations where I've said, I just don't have time to call, or I just don't have time to. And when you said in the book, you talked about it's just not a priority to me. Mm-hmm. Well, that's very convicting as well. I mean, it's definitely very good to recognize and to prioritize. We definitely need to do that. But also when it comes to loving people, to use a statement like, that person is not a priority to me right now, it can help you look at that whole situation differently, I think, and maybe really carve out a moment to reach out to that particular person and make them a priority to you.
Yeah, and honestly, the example in the book is really looking at that. Why isn't somebody a priority to you? Should they be? Not everybody needs to be. But if they should be, then perhaps it's time to really take a look at those relationships.
That was a good one.
Yes,
that was
you.
a good one.
It was a brief one, but
yes. It was a good one. Now, another one that you had in the book, which I thought was so important, is forgiveness.
Yes. So I, as a counselor, and especially when I was working on my my doctorate, I was all about working with anxiety and forgiveness. I talk about conviction. I was very convicted about forgiveness and unforgiveness, which, by the way, Microsoft Office does not even recognize as a real word, so it'll be red underlined if you ever are writing about it. But the interesting thing about forgiveness is Jesus talked about it more than he did love. But if you think about it, forgiveness is the highest form of love. Right? He forgave us. And why that's so important is because when we carry around unforgiveness, it is so damaging to us physically and emotionally. There's research that correlates 51% of cancer being rooted in unforgiveness. And the secular world is caught up with us, and there is now forgiveness therapy in recent times. That's not something that existed 20 years ago in such significance, but bitterness, resentment, manipulation, all of the things that go with unforgiveness are very damaging to us physically, emotionally, and mentally.
It's poisonous.
It is poisonous.
It really is. In Colossians 3, verse 13, which is another verse you have in your book, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. And we're required to forgive as Christians.
It's a command.
It's a command to forgive. And if we want to be forgiven, we have to show that same type of love and forgiveness to someone else. That's a really big one.
So the thing is that when you're looking at emotions, the first thing people say is, forgiveness is a process. I'm not ready, and all of that. And I'm just going to say that it is a process. But as soon as we know that there is an offense, that process needs to start.
Yeah.
And even if we don't feel forgiving, and this is that emotions thing, we can be forgiving. The problem, I think, with it is when you hold on to forgiveness, the enemy helps you to believe that you are preventing somebody from hurting you again. And there is no relationship between your unforgiveness and someone hurting you again. That's boundaries. It's an entirely separate thing. And so we need to. It's so important. We have to be right with God through this walk. And if we're carrying all of that in our heart, it doesn't bode well for us. We are in sin as well.
Let me ask you, do you think that lack of forgiveness could be rooted also in pride?
Absolutely. Pride is a forgiveness stopper. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about time versus priority. We've talked about intentionality, and we've talked about forgiveness. So what's another principle you want to share with us?
Well, I really want to talk a little bit. First of all, I have several different principles regarding anxiety, fear, and one of the ones about fear is fear and faith. And I use this principle to help when people have anxiety.
Okay.
So I think it's very worthwhile, even though it seems contrary to what we know. And if I tell you that fear and faith are the same thing, and fear is just faith in the wrong thing, people don't always know how to respond to that. I think a lot of times we learn that fear is the opposite of faith.
Right.
But it's truly not, and I can demonstrate that. Fear is faith in the wrong thing if you think about it this way. Let's say I have health anxiety, and I say, oh my gosh, I really fear, I have great fear, I have cancer. But I could also say, I really have great faith, I have cancer. And I'm saying the same thing.
Right.
And so when you ruminate on that and get those thoughts in your heart, and then Jesus talked a lot about letting things get in your heart and ruminating, dwelling on things, gets that there, you actually are harming yourself physically on a cellular level, your brain chemistry, you are actually making changes to your body. And so fear is okay. I know in the Bible it talks about, God did not give us a spirit of fear, and he's really talking more about anxiety. But fear, which originates, kind of in the amygdala of the brain, fear is a great response because it saves our lives when we are in danger. That's what it's for. It creates a fight or flight response and saves our life.
Right.
But a lot of time we're talking about the kind of fear that I'm talking about with fear and faith is really more anxiety or worry driven.
Right.
And I say that because it's faith. It manifests no different than faith. If I have faith in something, faith is action, and I am going to move toward that, right? If I want to lose weight, I'm not going to sit here and eat an entire chocolate cake and go, wow, I have great faith for this, right? Faith is more than just believing something, and as much as I want that to be true, it's not. So, but with fear, same thing.
Yeah.
And you make your anxiety worse. You change your brain chemistry. You can light up a PET scan like a Christmas tree. It's very significant. So one of the things that we do when I'm working with someone with severe anxiety is I say, you have a real gift of faith. And that rattles them, and they don't understand it.
Right.
But the fact is they do.
Yeah.
If they're manifesting faith in God, and I'm not saying name it, claim it, or anything. I'm just using manifesting to say, like I said, with the weight loss thing, that if I were to go and say I'm going to lose 20 pounds, I'm going to start exercise, I'm going to start doing things different in my life, my behavior changes because I'm manifesting that faith.
Right.
I change. And so, but we do that with fear. So when I tell somebody you have a real gift of faith, we need to just change the direction that you're moving in and reframe the thought process. As I do a lot with reframing. Sometimes looking at things differently is a night and day change.
Yeah.
And so I think that is such a significant process. We really need to know, look, where are we placing our faith?
Right. There's so much that is happening in our world that we could very easily, just be inundated with fear and anxiety almost on a daily basis.
That's
even
right.
just by, looking at the news, we can be ridden with fear. So let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that faith is there's action to that faith. It's not just faith in faith. There's some action to that some things I'm going to do differently to rid myself of fear.
That's right.
Or to work through that fear.
Yes, I'm going to look at it in a very different way. So the example under the principle was somebody had extreme anxiety about a teenager about spending the night at places that because she had gotten sick at her aunt's house, and so we put together a toolbox because having evidence for things, even though we have great faith, but really being able to see evidence is very helpful.
Right.
Because remember, what is faith? It is a manifestation of hope, right?
Right.
The substance.
Right.
So when we start putting together a toolkit and trying to reframe that and saying, listen, you can have faith that you're going to be well in those circumstances. You can have faith that nothing bad is going to happen to you. And you can have faith that Jesus is with you through that. It really very much changes things. And it's easy to believe if you have so much fear and anxiety that you're manifesting change, where you're getting sick, you're getting headaches, having problems with ulcers, afraid to leave your house, that kind of thing. Listen, you have some faith there, right? Because you're actually changing yourself.
Yeah.
So that means you could do that in your faith with Jesus. You could do that in any way that you want to. That is very strong faith. So I think that is a very important principle. And just to give it to you in a way that's really understandable, I take a lot of this for granted, so I'm sorry, but I tell people when I'm doing a study of some kind that if you have great faith as you're driving down a made road in your city, that if you run all the red lights, you're going to get pulled over and get a ticket. You're going to obey all of the traffic laws.
Right.
So, and Father, I'm sorry that I speed. I'm really sorry. I don't want to do that anymore. But that's really that's faith. Faith and obedience go together. So I think that's really a piece that's extremely important when we're talking about this.
That's a really big one as far as emotional health is concerned. So again, my guest is Daun Whittaker, and her book, Change Your Mind and Change Your Life, Your Guide to Emotional Health and Fulfillment. And we just touched on, I think, 4 principles, but there are a total of, let me just go to the table of content. There are 17 principles in this book. What I like about your book is, again, like I said, there's 17 principles there. We just touched on 4, but they are all ways that can help you be emotionally healthy, and have a fulfilling life. So, Daun, I appreciate you coming on today.
Why, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Sonya. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you.